The smell of pine needles and cinnamon has always meant Christmas to me, ever since I was a boy. For 30 years, that smell meant something else, too. It meant my wife Carol in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, stirring the cider on the stove while she sang along to whatever Carol was playing on the old radio. It meant our son, Danny, sliding across the hardwood in his socks trying to sneak a candy cane before dinner. It meant a house that, whatever its size, felt like the safest place on earth. But this Christmas, standing on the frozen driveway of my son's new house, staring up at the wreath on that enormous mahogany door, I didn't feel safe. I felt like a man about to walk into a room where the temperature had already dropped. I'm 64 years old. I spent 41 of those years as a diesel mechanic, first for a trucking company out of Ohio, then running my own little garage until my knees gave out and I had to sell it. I raised one son alone after Carol passed, 6 years ago now, from the cancer that took her slow and then all at once. I taught that boy everything I knew: how to change his own oil, how to shake a man's hand and mean it, how to stand up for the people he loves. I thought I'd done a decent job of it. Standing on that driveway, I wasn't so sure anymore. Danny had married into money. Not old money, not the kind with a family crest, but the loud, new kind that likes everyone to know exactly how much it cost. His wife, Whitney, was sweet enough when I first met her, a little guarded, maybe a little quick to correct Danny's grammar at the dinner table, but sweet. It was her mother, Deborah, who I'd learned to dread. Deborah had made her fortune in real estate flipping houses in Scottsdale, and she never let you forget it. This would be the first Christmas Danny hosted at his and Whitney's new place, the first time all of us would be under one roof, and I had a bad feeling in my gut the whole 3-hour drive over. I knocked, and Danny opened the door before my hand came down a second time. He looked good, healthy, a little heavier than the last time I'd seen him, dressed in a sweater that probably cost more than my truck payment. But there was something tight around his eyes, something that hadn't been there when he was a boy. "Dad, you made it." His voice had that forced brightness people use when they're bracing for something. "Wouldn't miss it," I said, and I meant it, even though some part of me already wished I could turn around and drive the 3 hours back home. The inside of that house looked like something out of a magazine. Vaulted ceilings, a Christmas tree taller than my garage bay doors, ornaments that matched in color like they'd been assigned by a computer. I stood in the entryway in my good flannel shirt, the one I'd ironed the night before, holding a tin of the peanut brittle I make every year, and I felt about as out of place as a wrench in a jewelry box. "Let me take that," Danny said, reaching for my coat, but he held it a little away from his body like he was afraid something might rub off on him. From the great room came a voice I recognized instantly, sharp as a dog whistle. "Danny, sweetheart, is that your father? Tell him to wipe his boots. We just had the floors redone." I hadn't even stepped past the mat yet. I wiped my boots anyway, twice, and walked into the great room, where Deborah was perched on a cream-colored sectional like she owned the deed to the whole state of Arizona. She had a glass of red wine in one hand and rings on every finger of the other, and she looked me over from my boots to my collar with the kind of expression you'd give a stain you were deciding whether to bother removing. "Well, look who finally arrived," she said. "We were starting to wonder if you'd gotten turned around somewhere. I imagine it's confusing, coming from the sticks into a real neighborhood. Good to see you too, Deborah. Merry Christmas." I kept my voice even. I'd promised myself I'd keep my voice even. "Mother, please," Whitney said from the doorway, drying her hands on a dish towel, and there it was again, that soft, useless correction that never actually corrected anything. Deborah just waved her off like swatting a fly. I looked past all of them, searching the room for the one person who made walking into that cold, glossy house worth it. My granddaughter, 8 years old, sharp as a tack, with Carol's exact laugh, the kind that used to make strangers in restaurants turn around and smile. "Where's Josie?" I asked. "Upstairs," Whitney said. "She'll be down for dinner." Danny put a hand near my back, not quite touching me, the way you'd guide a stranger through a room. "Dad, sit anywhere. Dinner's not for a while, yet." I picked a spot on a hard little accent chair near the wall, the one that looked least likely to show a mark if I so much as leaned on it wrong. Deborah watched me settle in like she was cataloging every wrinkle in my shirt. "You know, Walter," she said, using my first name the way you'd use a word you didn't much care for. "My late husband always said a man ought to dress for the company he keeps. He was in commercial development, you understand. He understood the importance of presentation. I'm a mechanic, ma'am, I said quietly. 41 years. Grease doesn't come out of a good shirt, so I don't ruin the good ones on work days. I thought I looked all right for tonight. S, 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 S. Oh, bless your heart, she said, in that tone that isn't a blessing at all. I'm sure you did your best. I looked over at Danny, waiting for something, anything, the way a man waits for backup that used to always come. He was standing by the fireplace, staring at his phone like it held the secrets of the universe, and I understood then that this wasn't new. This was a routine he'd learned to survive by disappearing into himself the second the insults started flying. Dinner was called, and I felt the same relief I imagine a man feels when the dentist finally says he can rinse. The dining room was its own kind of museum, a table long enough to land a plane on, candles that had never been lit before tonight, a centerpiece of gold-sprayed pine cones that must have cost more than my whole Christmas budget, and there, at the far end, swinging her legs, because they didn't reach the floor, was Josie. The second she saw me, her whole face lit up like somebody had flipped a switch behind her eyes. Grandpa Walt. She was out of her chair and across the room before her mother could stop her, wrapping her arms around my waist. I felt something loosen in my chest for the first time all evening. There's my girl, I said, and for a moment, just a moment, the room didn't feel so cold. Josie, indoor voice, Deborah snapped from her seat. And stop hanging on him, you'll wrinkle your dress. The seating was its own quiet insult. Whitney at one end, Danny at the other, Deborah and Whitney's brother, a man named Chad who wore his sunglasses indoors and a watch the size of a hubcap, took the middle seats. I was told, gently, that I'd be more comfortable down at the end, out of the traffic pattern. Immediate family sat in the center, apparently, and I had raised the man of the house, but I still didn't qualify. Josie planted herself right next to me anyway, dragging her chair down the table with a determined scrape that made Deborah's eye twitch. Josephine, honey, come sit by Nana, Deborah cooed, patting the seat beside her. I want to sit with Grandpa. He tells the best stories. He used to fix engines that could pull a whole house. He replaced parts, sweetheart, Deborah said, smiling thinly. There's a difference between fixing something and understanding how it works. That one landed somewhere under my ribs. I'd rebuilt engines nobody else in 3 counties could figure out. I kept men's trucks running so they could get to work and feed their kids. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest, and it mattered, whatever these people thought looking down from their gold pine cones. We ate. The food was good. I'll give them that, a honey-glazed ham, potatoes, green bean casserole, the works, but I couldn't taste much of it over the tension sitting in my stomach like a cold stone. Deborah held court the whole meal, talking about her latest property flip in Sedona, a charity gala she chaired, how impossible it was these days to find a contractor who actually showed up on time. Every sentence was aimed a little at me, like she was testing how many hits I could take before I cracked. You know, Walter, she said, turning to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I have to say, I'm surprised you made the trip all this way in that truck of yours. Danny mentioned it's got, what, 200,000 miles on it? 230, I said. Runs like new. I built the engine myself. How resourceful, she said, and laughed that thin, tinkling laugh that had no real warmth behind it at all. It's funny, we usually have people like that use the service entrance, but I suppose Danny insisted on the front door for you tonight. The table went quiet. I felt my jaw tighten, felt the old anger climbing up from somewhere deep, but I held it down. I told myself it was one night, for Josie. Mom, come on, Danny said weakly, not even looking up from his plate. Let's just eat. But Deborah wasn't finished. She never was, not until she'd drawn blood. I'm only making conversation. I'm curious, Walter, what is it like, exactly, living on a mechanic's pension? It must be freeing, in a way. No expectations left to live up to. I set my fork down carefully. I wouldn't call it freeing, ma'am. I put my son through college on that pension and what came before it. I paid off my house in 11 years. I never missed a payment on anything in my life. You own a house? She said, eyebrows arching in mock delight. How charming. I do hope it has indoor plumbing. Chad snorted into his wine. Whitney studied her napkin like it held the answers to a test. And Danny, my son, the boy I'd taught to change a tire in the rain without complaining, just kept slicing his ham into smaller and smaller pieces, saying nothing at all. I turned to Josie instead, because looking at her was the only thing keeping the evening bearable. So, kiddo, what do you think of that ham? She leaned in and whispered, dead serious. I think the pie is better. Can I just have pie for dinner? I laughed, the first real laugh of the night. You know, when I was your age, I tried that exact same trick. My mother told me if I ate pie before dinner, my stomach would think it was already Christmas morning and I'd have to wait a whole extra year for presents. Her eyes went wide as saucers. Really? No, I said, grinning, but let's finish dinner first anyway, and then we'll see about that pie. She giggled, and for just a second, the whole ugly evening felt worth it. That's when she started tugging at the collar of her dress, wriggling in her seat the way kids do when something's bothering them. Mom, this is itchy. It's scratching my neck. 3. Josephine, stop fidgeting, Whitney said, without looking up. But it hurts, Josie said, tugging harder, her face screwing up. I can take a look, I said, already standing. I used to help Danny with his church clothes every Sunday. I know a thing, or two, about a stubborn collar. I said, Dad, just leave it. Danny mumbled. She's fine. It's no trouble at all, I said, and walked around to kneel beside her chair. The tag on the collar had been sewn in wrong, digging right into the back of her neck. I worked it loose, folded it flat, smoothed her hair back down. There you go, sweetheart. Better? Way better. Thanks, Grandpa. She beamed up at me like I'd just performed surgery. I was walking back to my seat, right past the head of the table, when Deborah cleared her throat, loud enough to stop me in my tracks. And now, oh, Walter, since you're up, she said, waving a hand at the stack of dirty plates in front of her, why don't you clear these away? I imagine you're used to that sort of work. That was the moment something in me finally snapped clean in half. I turned around slowly. No, I said, I'm not going to clear your plates. I'm a guest in my son's house. I raised him. I'm going to sit back down and finish my dinner. You could have heard a pin land on that expensive rug. Deborah's face went a deep, blotchy red, the kind of red that comes from a woman who has never once in her life been told no. You want to sit, she repeated, standing so fast her chair scraped back across the hardwood, like a scream. You want to be treated like family. Exactly. She crossed the room before I even understood what was happening, and before I could raise a hand or say a word, she slapped me across the face, hard enough that my ears rang and my vision blurred white at the edges. The sound cracked through that dining room like a rifle shot. I tasted copper in my mouth where my teeth had caught the inside of my cheek. That, she hissed, standing over me while I held my stinging cheek, is for showing up in my daughter's house with your trailer park manners and thinking you belong at this table. Poor people eat in the kitchen, Walter. Not here. Never here. I looked up at my son. My vision was still swimming, my ears still ringing. Danny? I said, barely above a whisper. Are you going to say something? Danny's face had gone the color of the tablecloth. His hands were flat on the table, knuckles white. For one heartbeat I saw the boy he used to be, the one who'd have thrown himself between me and a moving car without a second thought. Then it vanished, swallowed up by something smaller and more afraid. Dad? He said, and his voice cracked right down the middle. Just apologize, please. Just say sorry and we can all sit back down. Something in my chest folded in on itself. It wasn't the slap that did it. It was that sentence. My own son watching his father get struck in his own dining room and asking me to apologize. She hit me, Danny, I said. She slapped me across the face in front of my granddaughter. Why? I know, he said, staring at the floor. But you provoked her. You embarrassed her in front of everybody. Just say, sorry, Dad, and we can move past this. I looked around that table for one friendly face. Whitney was folding and refolding her napkin, refusing to meet my eyes. Chad was leaning back in his chair with a smirk he wasn't even trying to hide, clearly enjoying the show. And Deborah stood there with her arms crossed, chin high, like a queen who'd just put down a small rebellion. And, well, she snapped, are you going to apologize? Or do I need to call the police and have you removed from my daughter's property? I had nowhere left to go. I couldn't raise a hand to a woman. I couldn't say the things boiling up in my throat. Not with Josie sitting right there, watching every second of it. I opened my mouth, searching for something, anything, that could pull this evening back from the edge it had gone over. Then a small voice cut through the silence like a blade through glass. Nana. It was Josie. She'd slipped out of her chair and was standing just a few feet away, her phone gripped tight in both hands, her face lit pale by the screen. She'd been sitting there quiet the whole time, watching everything unfold, and none of us had noticed. Nana, she said again, louder this time, her voice shaking just slightly. I recorded it. All of it. The room went dead silent. Deborah's face drained white in an instant. What are you talking about, Josephine? Whitney's voice climbed an octave, sharp with panic. Turn that off right now. But Josie didn't move. She looked at me first, her hero, her grandfather, cheeks still red from the slap, and then she turned the phone toward the room, toward her grandmother, toward all of them. It's live, she said, her small voice trembling but steady underneath. It went to Mommy's Facebook. Aunt Renee is watching. Everybody can see you, Nana. A collective gasp went around that table like a wave, and Deborah lunged for the phone, but Josie was faster, ducking behind my legs, small fingers clutching my pant leg. Deborah's hand closed on empty air, and she froze there, half bent over, her whole face twisted between fury and dawning horror. She understood, in that instant, exactly what had just happened. Every sneer, every insult, every slap broadcast live to everyone she knew. The little red light on the screen blinked off a moment later. The stream had ended, but the damage was already sitting out there, in the world, permanent, unerasable. The clock on the wall ticked in that thick silence. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. Whitney finally broke it, her voice trembling with an anger she'd never once aimed at her own mother. Josie, who did you send that to? Josie looked up at me, then back at her mother, and took a breath that shook her whole small body. Mom, she asked, in a voice so plain and clear it cut through every excuse in that room, isn't it wrong to hit people? Nobody answered. She looked at her grandmother, then at her mother, then finally at her father and asked it again. Isn't it wrong to hit people? Nana hit Grandpa. I saw her do it, and nobody stopped her. She was right, and every grown adult at that table knew it. They'd all sat there and let a bully strike a defenseless old man, and they'd been caught, not by some security camera, but by an 8-year-old who understood right from wrong better than any of them. Danny finally lifted his head. Whatever mask he'd been wearing all night had cracked clean off, and underneath it was something like horror at himself. Oh my God, Dad, he whispered, tears standing in his eyes. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Whitney looked like she might be sick. Deborah stood frozen, with her hand pressed over her mouth, eyes darting around the room like a cornered animal looking for a way out that didn't exist. I didn't care about any of their panic anymore. I knelt down in front of Josie and put both hands gently on her small shoulders. Sweetheart, I said, my voice thick, can I see the phone for a second? She handed it over, her fingers cold against mine. The stream's viewer list scrolled past Whitney's book club, Danny's business partner, half a dozen neighbors, Deborah's whole charity committee. 40-some people had watched live, and by the little notification banners stacking up on the screen, it looked like it had already been shared twice over on someone's private group chat. I looked at Danny. Call the police, I said quietly, and his head snapped up. Dad, she struck me, Danny, in front of your daughter. I want it on a report, not for revenge. So there's a record, in case she ever thinks about raising a hand to anyone else in this family. Whitney started to protest, but for once Danny found something like a spine, even if it came far too late to matter to me. Do it, he said quietly. To no one and everyone. Call them. I stood back up, feeling strangely calm, calmer than I had all evening. I looked at that phone one more time before I handed it back to my granddaughter, and I understood something clearly for the first time all night. That video wasn't going to be about revenge. It was never mine to use as a weapon. It was a gift. given to me by the one person at that table who still had the courage to tell the truth out loud. I turned to Deborah, who was trembling now, every ounce of her bravado gone. "You told me poor people belong outside," I said, my voice low and even. "Tomas. You were right about one thing tonight. I don't belong in this house. I never did. Tomas. I never did. Poor people. But watching what happens to your little charity committee once this gets around, that's going to be worth every mile of the drive home." I handed the phone back to Josie and knelt down to her level one more time. "You did the right thing, sweetheart. You hear me? The right thing, even when it was hard. That makes you braver than every grown-up sitting at this table tonight." I stood, walked to the front hall, and pulled my old coat back on the one I'd been embarrassed to wear into that house just a few hours before. It didn't feel like something to be ashamed of anymore. It felt like the only honest thing in the building. Danny caught my arm at the door. "Dad, please, don't leave like this. We can fix it." "You can't fix tonight, son," I said, pulling my arm free, gently. "You watched a woman hit your own father and asked him to say sorry for it. I don't know how a man comes back from a choice like that. Maybe you don't, either, but you're going to have some time to think on it." I walked out into the cold, down that long paved driveway, past the reindeer lights staked into the frozen lawn, and I didn't look back. Behind me I could hear raised voices, a woman crying, a phone ringing that nobody wanted to answer. In the weeks that followed, the video did exactly what videos like that do now. It got picked up, shared, passed hand to hand across 100 group chats, and then out into the wider world entirely. Deborah was quietly asked to step down from the charity board she'd chaired for a decade. A few of her real estate clients found other agents. Whitney went silent on social media altogether. None of it was justice, not really, not the kind that fixes anything that actually broke that night, but it was something. Danny called me almost every day for a month. I let most of them go to voicemail. Not out of spite, I want to be clear about that, but because I needed the quiet to figure out how to forgive a thing like that, if I even could. A man doesn't owe anybody an apology accepted before it's ready to be real. Then, near the end of January, a letter came in the mail, in handwriting still learning its own shape. Josie had drawn the two of us on the back of an old church garage bay. Me under a truck, her handing me a wrench, both of us grinning like fools. She said she missed me. She said she'd gotten her phone taken away for 2 months, but she didn't regret it, not for one single second. She said she'd do the exact same thing again if she had to. She was the only one in that whole house who understood, really understood, what had happened at that table. The slap didn't break me that night. What nearly broke me was the silence that came after it, my own son's silence loudest of all. But it wasn't that silence that ended up defining the whole night either. It was one small, steady voice, refusing to look away when every adult in the room already had. Sometimes the only justice a man really needs is the truth, spoken plainly, by the smallest person willing to say it out loud.